This is Test Case Scenario with me, your host, Jason Baum. This podcast is the definitive hub for knowledge and stories in the software testing and development communities. If you're new to the channel, hit the subscribe button and let's dive straight into the episode. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Test Case Scenario. I am your host, Jason Baum, and with me, as always, Marcus Merrell. Marcus, nice to see you.
Good to be here. Thanks. I'm in the same place 2 weeks in a row this time.
I was going to call it out, but you called it out first. As people have been writing in telling me I've been giving you too hard of a time, so I'm going to cool it. I'm going to cool it on that. They actually haven't been writing in. It's just me being paranoid, but that's okay. And with us today, we are very lucky to have AmyJune. AmyJune, thank you so much for joining the podcast.
Hi there. Excited to be here. My name is AmyJune Hineline. I am currently working with the Linux Foundation as the Certification Community Architect, which is a fancy way to say that I help build exams for the Linux Foundation. But more exciting, I get to be part of a team from the CNCF. I sit on a working group for the deaf and hard of hearing community because I am hard of hearing myself. So it's pretty exciting to work with the group, moving things forward to have more accessible spaces. I'm a hospice nurse by trade, so I understand how hard it is for people to use technology. And when I got into tech, when I found out that people could make accessible products like websites or apps and they didn't, it was unbelievable to me. So that's how I got into like testing and QA and accessibility and stuff like that. And I'm really excited to be here.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us and coming on the podcast and talking about a topic that's really passionate to the three of us. We were talking before we hit record. I let people in behind the third wall, fourth wall, third wall, one of those walls, fourth wall, third wall. See, we don't even know. Doesn't matter. Whatever wall, makes no difference. Letting you in on how the sauce is made. We were talking about just how passionate we are on this topic. We did a recording a few months ago with Rachel Yomtube, and they were nice enough to join us from DQ and talk about the topic. And now we wanted to revisit it with AmyJune and the great work that you're doing at CNCF. And there's more news that we wanted to touch on because it's not really news. This has been around for a little bit. We kind of touched the surface of it with Rachel. And so we wanted to pick the conversation up with you, AmyJune, that there is the European Accessibility Act for compliance. And that is coming out in 2025, specifically June 28th, 2025. And we wanted to make sure that we gave kind of this high level introduction to it and then kind of talk through it a bit together and then touch some key takeaways and things that folks at home who are listening to this should do to prepare. How's that sound to everybody?
Perfect.
Sounds great.
We're ready.
It's already too late to get started.
I guess it's already too late. Yeah, you have to say yes now. All right, great. So the European Accessibility Act, I can kind of start us off by just giving a very high level overview. So basically, it's this landmark law that's going to define accessibility requirements for everyday digital products and services. It's going to make life easier for the roughly 87 million people living with disabilities. And that's basically 1 in 5 Europeans. This is just for Europe, as the name kind of indicates. And that's where that number comes from. It's going to touch almost every major vertical and for all digital products. And so that's everything from phone services, bank services, e-commerce, websites, mobile, electronic tickets, ebooks, access to visual media, computers and operating systems, smartphones, TV equipment, ATMs and payment terminals, e-readers, you name it, it's going to cover it. It was approved in 2019. Members across the EU have been preparing for this. And we want to make sure, first of all, that the listeners were aware, if you haven't heard, because time to achieve compliance is running out. June 28th, 2025 is now less than a year away, and it's getting shorter every month. And I think part of my wanting to bring this up too is not just the impact for European businesses, but is this going to be the new GDPR in impact, where at first we were kind of slow to adopt it here in North America, and now pretty much everyone has complied to GDPR laws. And some of that is how GDPR is written. And I don't know the specifics enough of this act, whether it kind of implies this is for Europeans, whether they're in Europe at the time of usage or outside. That's the big stipulation in GDPR. What do you all think? Is this going to be the new GDPR?
Well, I hope so, especially like when the shelter in place happened, we realized like we're a global community. And so having these assets, across, like, there's hardly a water between us anymore, And so like if we want to like function and have consumers of our products or consumers of our content, we really have to reach that global audience. So I have hope that it would be like GDPR, where it sort of like just becomes, and we talked earlier about how we're slower for adoption, but sometimes we need that example as North Americans, we need those examples from others, or maybe that blank page is scary for us a little bit more than Europeans, and so we emulate them a little bit. So I'm hoping that it does reach that global level.
Yeah. Marcus, what do you think?
I hope so too. I mean, I've been saying for many years that there's 3 reasons to adopt accessibility. One is because it's the right thing to do, to be inclusive and be able to bring more people into the fold. And the second reason is that because there's a whole bunch of people who need it, and you actually increase your audience, you increase your revenue if you are accessible. And now that we've gone long enough without people sort of using the first 2 reasons to get their act together and make their products accessible, then, well, we're to the point where we got to legislate. And so it's unfortunate that we're here, but I'm glad if anything can make it happen, I think it's fantastic.
I think most change, unfortunately, happens that way, right?
Jason, you mentioned a statistic about 1 in 5 Europeans, but we're all kind of on the road to some sort of disability, because I think, we all know like the temporary, the permanent, and the situational disabilities, but we also have like episodic disabilities, right? Like maybe you have diabetes and your low blood sugar and your vision goes down for the day. So we're all kind of disabled. So I think that number is 100% of people on the planet.
I love that you called it out, because I picked that up too. That's why I was like, first clarification EU, but yeah, I agree with you. It seemed low what they're giving, and also people have to come forward and say that they have a disability, and many people don't declare that they have a disability due to the fact that there's so much stigma around having a disability, which for some reason I understand why, but why? Like you said, almost everyone deals with some type of disability at some point. I'm one of those people that I don't believe that we should have stigmas around these things. I have a neuromuscular disorder. AmyJune, in your intro, you already said your disability. And
I'm physically disabled too. So,
okay.
So, but you can't tell that on a screen, can you? You know what I mean? So, yeah. And, I'm tired. I went to a concert last night, so my cognitive function is down, like all of those things. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a sliding scale, like most things, and many ailments cannot be seen even in person. And I think making people aware is the first step, and then actually freaking doing something is the second step. And so it's good to see the EU kind of taking action here. It's interesting because you do need to give it some standards of what you're considering a disability. It has to be written. So the way that the W3C is kind of saying there's a disability or describing disability is 5 categories: auditory, mild to severe hearing loss; sight, blindness, poor vision, color blindness; speech, difficulty producing or articulating verbal language; cognitive, difficulty with memory, attention, and learning; and physical, weakness and limitations of motor control or movement. I think that pretty much covers, if you're going to have to do it at a very high level, which unfortunately they have to do, because the broader you can be and more generalized, I think, the better. Because like we were just saying, there's so many variations. What do you think of those descriptions?
Well, it goes back to that situational disability thing too, right? How do you define a situational disability? I like to use the example because I do public transit I usually have a kid with me. So I'm holding a kid and I'm scrolling my phone. So I only have one hand, right? So that's situational, right? So it's like those parameters are almost too defined. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
severe to moderate. What does severe to moderate mean? That's like, so my definition is going to be different than your definition, right? And that hearing one really bothers me because there's audio processing issues too. How do you define an audio processing issue when you talk about an act? So it's like words are so limiting, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's a bit of clarification that I can give, like permanent disabilities from birth, illness, disease, or accidents, temporary impairment from surgeries, accidents, or medications, changing abilities due to aging, situational limitations due to loud environments, bright lighting, and other environmental factors. I mean, honestly, to me, a lot of it's not. We talked about this with Rachel, but it's like to put the term disability is almost the offensive piece of it, because aging is not a disability. Many of this is not a disability. This is life. What we're doing is making things accessible for all. And so what's that mean?
It goes back to that term that we use in grade school, like special ed. And it's like, why is it special? It's like meeting our human needs. You know what I mean? It's like we all have different needs. And why is it special? There's nothing special about me. I'm just disabled, So a lot of it is that language that we learn as Americans, like from grade school up, I think they still call it special ed, which is so weird to me. Then that's the stigma people get. Like when I go in to class because I had a speech impediment, I felt like I had a stigma around me because you went to a special room and it was off to the side. And it's a difficult thing to define and label, I don't know. Just like I said, words are limiting.
Yeah.
I'm afraid at this point, they're just having to pay attention to actuarial tables saying if we account for this category, that will help the most number of people, and the second category will help the next most. So we hope that by defining 5 categories in this first iteration, probably the way they're looking at it, we're going to be able to cover some fair percentage of the population. I feel like as a government industry, they kind of have to have that approach, even though it's definitely not going to make everyone happy.
Well, it goes back to like the WCAG standards, the A, the AA, and the AAA. The A is like, can't use your website. 2 A's is most people can. And that AAA is the optimal amount that everyone can. So I can see those standards.
And I actually have some clarification on the very first question that I asked. We are actually putting together a guide to the European Accessibility Act. Sauce Labs is doing this in addition to, or in cooperation with DQ, our proud partner in this, and saying that, just kind of defining everything. And within there is the answer to my question, which I probably should have led with, is that it is every company doing business in the EU, whether based in Europe, North America, Asia, or anywhere else.
Yep. So if you are in Europe or a European citizen in Europe, if you're using software, it has to be EAA compliant. What I don't know is if you're a European citizen in America using an American software site, I don't think that applies, but it might. GDPR, it most certainly does, but I don't know about EAA.
What about a European company having a product in the United States? Does that count because it's American citizens?
I think it counts.
I think it counts.
Citizens? Okay.
It's saying nearly every company doing business in the EU, whether based in Europe, North America, Asia, or anywhere else, must ensure that their newly marketed digital products and services are accessible.
Oh, so it's newly marketed. So
it's new to market. Yeah. I think it's hard to say, take all your old products. That's a massive undertaking. While that would be amazing and wonderful, I think best case scenario, I think it's just going forward.
I still wish they would, but the truth is everyone loves to redesign their website every year. So either this is going to put a stop to that and let us use functioning software for longer, or it's going to force them to, critically evaluate. I hate that thing. Every year my bank redesigns their account page. I'm like, come on, I don't need this. It was fine. So yeah, now I'm the old man.
Obviously, we talked about the benefits. Where do you see the challenge? We're sort of talking about the challenges right now, but what do you see the challenges of this act?
There's the education part of it. Like, when we get onboarded, when we learn our software and things like that, or we're onboarded, like we're QA people or whatever, maybe moving forward, some of that challenge is going to be education. That way they build it right from the start, right? Because we all know that you can't stick a blueberry in a muffin afterward and call it a blueberry muffin, So learning how to build this stuff from the start. So there might be this like learning curve, which will cost money. Education costs money. It could cost money to have a clinic for a week and learning accessibility. So I think that might be challenging for some folks, and that might hinder them putting out newer products as an example, but that's kind of like stretching it out. But I do see like the educational part being sort of a thing that people are going to have to get around, like the standard that people are going to have to teach, and where are those standards coming from and who's going to do that, and that kind of thing.
But doesn't the new business, because like just in the EU we said, or actually globally, the WHO says that 1.3 billion people globally have a significant disability, significant. So now you're opening up markets, and that's ultimately what will drive new product creation. Does that outweigh that challenge?
If we can convince people that it's true.
Yeah, disabled people are loyal too. Like if I go to a website, because I don't use a mouse, I just use a keyboard. So if I go to a website and they don't have a skip to main content link, I'm out. But I find a website that I like that's accessible, I'm like, I'm going to just go back to that one, And so I think that might be something too, is people are used to visiting websites and having that familiarity. Like as a disabled person, you don't want to be frustrated when you visit a website. You don't want it to look different every time. An older person does not want, their social security website to change every year, So once that hurdle is done of like changing things and making it accessible, I think that part for disabled people being loyal might open up a little bit, and they have faith in more content, and they'll branch out and maybe read Medium articles because, they hadn't before because they can't access the website for whatever reason, So yeah, that might be really nice, or will be really nice. But it's that learning curve, not only for the people building the products, but the people using the products as well.
Yeah, that's a good call out.
One challenge I think I see is enforcement. And I guess the reason this is probably a little bit different from GDPR is that on the one hand, GDPR, everyone's going to jealously guard their privacy, and they can't wait to report violations of this to the government. This accessibility issue is not nearly, in my opinion, as visible. And it's probably, it's serving a population that is not accustomed to being accommodated necessarily. So they might not think to file a complaint or something like that. Now, on the other hand, there are starting to be accessibility trolls in the world, which, unlike patent trolls, I think might end up being a net positive. Not that I'm encouraging it, but I know that that there are organizations in America who, after the Supreme Court decided against that popular pizza chain, that they had to make their site accessible because it's no different from having a wheelchair ramp in your restaurant. So now there's companies that are going after and suing people saying you're not compliant with this. So on the one hand, it's going to be harder to enforce from a grassroots single individual level. But on the other hand, we are going to have activist groups that I hope are going to help with enforcement. Mm-hmm. So we'll see.
Yeah. I mean, and that is kind of where my head goes to, is like the ADA, because how is this any different? How is your virtual property any different than your physical real world business property? I don't really understand that. Why are we allowed to comply in one place but not the other? Shouldn't it be covered in ADA, for example?
I think it's just not enforced. I could be wrong, but I think it's just, AmyJune, do you know actually? I don't know.
It's not enforced. And, there's more regulations out now than there were. Like now, like if you get federal funds, your website has to be accessible according to like the AA standard, and I think every year our standards push us a little bit more to be accessible. And I've seen a lot of companies hiring for accessibility now too, which, before it was sort of that team that was off to the side and we only use them sometimes, but now we have a team that's like making sure that, we're doing remediation, and people are using it to their advantage too. Like, hey, we have a support team and we have consultancy, we have a support team, and hey, whatever website, you've been a client for forever, do you want to have an accessibility audit, and I think like as these standards like tighten up and tighten up and tighten up, we're going to see more of that get people having to follow it, because sometimes it's the bottom line of the dollar that gets people to change their websites. Unfortunately, it's not the compassion. It's not the wanting for inclusivity. It's like, oh no, we're going to get sued. So,
Yeah.
and that's sad.
Yeah, I mean, it does. It comes down to that. Like, that was one of the first three things that Marcus was saying earlier, right? And you're echoing here, and you're right. And something I want to add as a challenge that we didn't say, we have this report called Developers Behaving Badly. That's now an annual report. And in it, I mean, we're not saying that the developers are at fault here. We just wanted a catchy title. But they've got a lot on their plates. And no one's like, hey, let's give developers more time to account for accessibility now. It's not going to happen. And so
let me butt in with that, though. So this is like my advocacy when I join a new job or I like working with a new team is like, if you have professional development time because PHP standards change or a new version of Drupal comes out, then why wouldn't you take the time to have the accessibility training too? You know what I mean? It's like one of those things that it's just like, for us, it's a no-brainer. We would like train for accessibility, but us as a community has to kind of push that too, right? Like, you know, I think now developers are seeing that things have to be accessible, right? Because whatever, but those, I'm going to call out agencies that need to make that professional development time too. Not just send them to like the KubeCon, but sending them to like, you know, Higher Ed Web where we learn about accessibility, or Higher Ground, you know, conferences and things like that, where we're sending them to accessibility conferences and that's all they're going to learn about for 3 days. If we take the time for them to learn PHP, then we should take the time to learn how to use a website.
I love that you called that out, because it was going to be my next question. So I love that you called that out, because it's not on the developers anyway, right? It's on the designers change,
and it's on the designers.
Well, it's on the designers.
It's on the designers,
but it's also on management.
But it's also their management has to prioritize this, because there is a global business impact at a very high level, and it's on the management. And it is a culture shift, just like when anything else that needs to be changed and adopted for the first time. This is no different.
Maybe we could even tap into your network. I want to find a developer or a set of developers who have learned how to implement accessible software, been successful with it, and come to understand, because I know that this is the case, that once you've done, you know, implemented accessibility into your software, the software functions better and it is better instrumented to do things like good testing and good user acceptance testing. Everything. It lifts all boats, not just those with disabilities. And I want to find people who could come on the podcast and tell stories like that.
Oh,
not to put you on the spot, but I would love some introductions. That would be great.
That would be so great.
So I have the privilege of working in the Drupal community, and several years ago, 2015, so more than several years ago, one of the standards for our new version of Drupal was to have an accessible product. We did not release it until it was accessible. And it's a content management system. It's a system where people use it to build their websites, you know, like weather.com is on it, you know, the White House used to be on it, things like that. But the people who were building the software would take the accessibility out of it because they didn't like the way like the hover worked over something, you know, or something like that. But the community, like I have the privilege of that was my first community I worked with, where everyone thinks about accessibility. Like when we make any commits to the project, we have to run tests and stuff like that. So yeah, I have a bunch of people that can talk about software. And yeah, it's an amazing thing though, like how we build these products. And it's, well, even like our content creators, right? They break accessibility by adding content that's not accessible. So it comes down to like everyone, like we were talking about wireframes, we were talking about designers, we were talking about people who do the user research, and then also the people who write the content, right? If they're going to like put gray on gray and they're going to like, you know what I mean? All of those things, or have headings as styling, you know, things like that. It's like that education level. If we take the time to educate our developers, then we need to educate everybody from like all of the steps. And I think that's something like when we release our products, teaching them how to use our product is like, here's how you don't break accessibility, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. And it's getting back to it. It's a culture change, and why that culture change needs to happen. I mean, because this is not a challenge, but more perhaps the ultimate reason, like we've been saying repeatedly. I'll give it more kind of meat on the bones in impact is the risk to the business. And it's definitely the dollars and the fines and the fact that, starting June 28th, 2025, all applicable businesses must comply with the act when making those digital products or services. And non-compliance exposes you to significant fines, penalties, and legal challenges. And that can lead to, we're talking significant money. And also, by the way, no one wants that sore spot on their brand. You're the company that didn't comply to the Accessibility Act. We may ignore it, but then when it's called out, I feel like all that goes away and everyone's like shaming that business. And like you said, I feel like that community is very vocal at times.
Yeah, and I think this is an educational moment for advocates too, that we don't shame, that we use these experiences as learning opportunities for those people. And we come at it with a softer edge, like, hey, that CAPTCHA you had like only works for people who can see, right? Again, giving them examples instead of shaming them and calling them out like that, that calling in sort of thing. I think that might land a little bit better too.
Yeah, no one likes to be called out in public, but you do run that risk. And I think that is something that businesses must think about when they're like creating these new products and need to change the culture to prioritize this happening. And I think we learned some lessons with GDPR, because that one, I think we had time and a lot of people just kind of wasted it. Like somehow I think they thought it was going to go away. I don't know. I remember that being the initial feeling in North America was like, it's over there. It's not going to impact
it's next month.
And then, and then all of a sudden it was time and everyone was like, are we compliant? Because people read a bit more and understood. So I feel like that's why we're doing this episode and why we're putting out the ebook and why we're trying to really force home this message, because we want to make sure your business is compliant so that you don't run these risks. To me, that doing the right thing should be the reason.
Agreed. That's why I'm so happy we partnered with DQ on this thing, because they have the expertise to not only help us to help our own customers, but to create things like VPATs and do audits and provide training and consulting, stuff like that. Because they're the true experts in this.
And developer tools too, right? Don't they do the Axe Engine? Yeah.
That's right. And we have incorporated that into our product. We're not here to promote that, but like that's one of the things I'm really happy that we've done.
No, we don't openly promote on that. Although I am wearing a lot of Sauce Labs
you're a walking billboard there.
I do this for me. But if you're listening, because I mentioned our hat, shoot us a message, community-hub. That's not an underscore. It is a hyphen, community-hub@saucelab.com. Mention that you saw me wearing this hat, and I promise you I will send you a hat. There's our plug for our swag. There's our promotion for the fun swag giveaway. That's what I get to do. But it is true about DQ. And maybe we could summarize to kind of wrap this up. What would you say are the top 5 takeaways or tips for EAA compliance that you would recommend? Let's just do them one by one. AmyJune, what's like the first tip you would give based on this?
I would have real users test products instead of developers, like have someone who actually uses a screen reader for functionality versus a developer using a screen reader. So I would have real user testing to maybe help move that forward a little bit.
Love that. Marcus, take number 2.
I would say, take a deep breath and do it incrementally. Prioritize the areas in your software, hopefully guided by real users, where it is falling down the most. So what I would do, approach it 2 different ways. Take the most high priority part of your website, the part that produces revenue, adding something to a shopping cart, making sure it checks out, and then make sure that the top pieces of that are first compliant, because that is where your business lives, and that's where you need to start.
Awesome.
To give you the most return.
All right, AmyJune.
Yeah. We have to think about the vendors we use, because maybe your website is compliant, but you send them to Stripe or whatever. I don't know if Stripe's non-accessible. Sorry I didn't call them out, but just as an example, sending them to a shopping cart that is not accessible. So you have to think about the vendors you're using for your service and products too. So that's something to think about when you're developing your product.
Marcus, number 4.
Don't just rely on like Reddit. Get expertise, get consultants, get people who really know what they're talking about, participate in forums, be defensive about this kind of stuff. Don't, make sure that you are constantly self-aware of your own abilities so that you're not just assuming that, the story about the NTSA and the fact that when the airbags first debuted, they were killing children and people of small stature because the people who were testing them were all, 5'10" to 6'4", men. So don't assume that your point of view is good enough. So consult not just with users, but also with experts who have really been around and seen everything.
AmyJune, take the last one, 5.
I have 3 and Marcus only had 2. Oh my gosh, the pressure.
I'll take one more. I'll get one more.
All right, we'll do top 6. How about that for fairness? I want one. I'm going to do 7.
All right.
This is going to be a top 50 list.
All right.
You folks do sort of some of this is like making sure that we have like CI/CD pipelines, continuous integration testing, where accessibility is one of those checks that we run before we do a commit, right? And building more testing products, right? Making sure that continuous delivery is, just like our learning, right? Making sure that you do that testing before it's released rather than having to fix the bug afterward.
Yeah, test early, test often, test throughout, and that counts for accessibility too. All right, Marcus, you really want number 6?
Yeah, I just want to say, take it seriously. This is a good thing to get ahead of. It's going to do nothing but good for you. And if you don't do it, it's going to do nothing but bad for you. Take it seriously, be empathetic, be inclusive, and help your fellow person.
Can I wrap it up?
Absolutely.
Okay. I didn't get any, and now I feel left out. When in doubt, prioritize accessibility. If you're not sure,
do it
then
anyway.
Do it. Do it anyway. And then the last one, time. It's coming up so soon. The time to act is now. If you're not sure when to start, it already happened. That's the thing. You already missed that. So get on it now. Thank you so much, AmyJune.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marcus. This is great. Let's do a follow-up episode. What do you think? That would be great. We'll plan that.
I would love to talk to someone who's actively having to deal with this.
We want to plan these episodes to continue up until June 28th and then after to make sure everyone is compliant. Hey, what are you working on? How's it going? What are the things that you've learned about it? What are some tips, tricks, all that, and revisit it? Because it's not an issue that ends. This is just a continuation. We need to make sure that we're covering it from all bases so that you're aware out there. AmyJune, thanks again. Thank you at home for listening. We appreciate it. We appreciate your time as always. Hit us up, community-hub@saucelabs.com for a hat. If you mention that you watched this episode, we want to make sure you're going to incorporate accessibility testing and be aware. So this is our way of saying thanks for doing that, for listening to the episode. And we will see you next time on Test Case Scenario. Thank you for joining us on Test Case Scenario. Share your thoughts in the comments. We'll make sure to respond to each and every single one. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell to keep in touch. If you missed our last episode, it's popping up on your screen right now. Go, click it. Until next time on Test Case Scenario.